Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. Hello world! Curses and madness be upon you all, my friends. I am Euclidean Vision, the emotional support, back today with yet another hero concept for the upcoming Overwatch 2, keeping up my track record of outright ignoring purely organic heroes with a tank build for the NULL sector leader, affectionately known as NULL HECTOR. With that being said, I'm going to be referring to our enigmatic malevolent machination not as NULL HECTOR, but by a name I feel is more likely to actually be the case for the leader of something such as NULL sector, Void. So, quickly before we jump into the abyss, this concept has come about now sort of as a product of my Anubis Overwatch 2 theory, which I'm obviously going to recommend you pop and check out as well, along with my other previous hero concepts, which includes like 5 different fucking versions of Echo, among other such nonsense. And so, speaking of nonsense, let us strike on forth and enter the Void. So, to start with, Void's base stats and general role. I aim to make a tank build here that could sit somewhere between the main and off slots, while not being like determinately better in one or t'other. And the overall theme of the kit itself comes from their seeming role at the head of NULL sector, and the concept of a summoner class, or even maybe something more like a druid or a hunter, using constructs beyond themselves to attack and soak up damage simultaneously. The overall feel to me is similar to something like a mixture between Symmetra and Zarya, with some sprinkles of Orisa and Torbjorn thrown in for good measure too, so you could very well call this the first builder tank, and for that matter go check out my builder support if you like those kind of characters. But enough of my empty words. Looking at the base stats for such a build, I came to a health pool of 400 total, split evenly between regular health and shields, with shields tying in somewhat to one of their abilities down the line. Their hitbox seems sensible to be made around average for the tank category, given their available protection and effective range, and there's no real reason for them to be speedy. This is a thick Void after all. And so properly into the kit, starting with their primary fire because we've got no passive ability for Void at this point. Sticking to the theme of NULL sector and a summoner, their primary fire sees them using a Slicer. As seen in the Uprising event, the Splicer acts as a beam weapon, dealing 90 damage per second, having 60 ammo with 9 being consumed per second, so you can shoot for around 6.5 seconds before reloading, and has a 12 meter range. It's pretty simple at this point. That will change. And that will change very quickly as we move on to Void's reload mechanic, Splice. Upon reloading, Void throws the Slicer in their hand out into the field to enact one of 2 different purposes. When thrown directly at an enemy, or while there was ammo still left in the clip when thrown, the Slicer will explode, dealing 55 to 90 damage total, split between the direct and splash damage, in a 2 meter radius. However, if you fully consume the ammo clip, when you throw the Slicer, if it does not directly hit an enemy, it will set itself up as a turret, acting how the Slicers worked in Uprising, targeting the nearest enemy with its own health pool of 120 HP, dealing a slightly reduced 60 damage per second within its existing 12 meter range. So to summarise, whenever you reload, if you directly hit an enemy with your thrown Slicer, expect to deal a nice chunk of burst damage, but if you've managed to fully go through your ammo clip and managed to place the Slicer down, it will act as a turret. And we're going to come back to this shortly as we cover Void's ult fire, Assimilate. For general use, Assimilate involves Void deploying one of their tentacle-like hairs as a skill shot very similar to Roadhog's hook to attack an opponent to drain their HP. In terms of application, this will feel exactly like Roadhog's hook, having the same range and the same projectile speed, but once it hits an enemy there will be no pull in, but you will drain 50% of their current health and transfer that to yourself as healing. This ends up having an overall cast time of about 1 second, with the cast out, the drain, and the tentacle retracting. However, Assimilate can be used not just on enemies, but also on your thrown Slicer, when using Assimilate on your thrown slicer acting as a turret, you will pull the slicer back to you, allowing you to dual wield. This slicer, once returned, will have its own ammo count, will do the same damage, etc. as when you had it in your hand initially, and this just essentially allows you to dual wield, doubling your personal DPS output. This also resets whether there is a turret slicer on the field, allowing you to change its position or build up to extra explosive slicer damage. Also, when Assimilate is used to grab one of your constructs, your slicers, the 8-second cooldown that it normally has is halved down to 4 seconds. And now to stick with the tentacles for a bit, Void's first activated ability, their shift ability, Propagate, whereby another tentacle hair links to an ally or a construct. The reason I use the word construct will make a bit more sense when we cover their E ability shortly. But how Propagate works is when it links to an ally or a construct, Void will take 50% of the damage that is dealt to that target, while also having a personal 25% damage resistance themselves. This has a 20 meter cast range and a 30 meter maximum range once it's been attached to its target. While there is line of sight, it will have a soft locked activation, and when there is no line of sight, Propagate will attach to just your nearest allied target within its normal range. Once attached, it requires line of sight from either party to maintain the connection, or it will dissipate after a second. There is no cooldown to Propagate, and the target that is life-linked also gains the heal from Void's alternate fire, Assimilate. So if you're starting to see how all of Void's techniques and abilities sort of combine with each other to create further effects, how much synergy there is between them, that should all sort of come together with this final one. Because as they're a tank, they sound like a bit of a bruiser at present. They don't sound like they have much in the sort of main tank capability. This is where that comes in with Void's E ability, Eradicate. And again, if you remember my point about this being a summoner build and the links to the Uprising event, Eradicate airdrops a stationary Eradicator, the large barrier-wielding enemies from the Uprising event. This will be placed using an indicator similar to Reaper's Shadow Step or Symmetra's Teleporter, with a 25 meter range, and as with D.Va's Mech Drop, this deals 50 damage when the Eradicator lands on the ground, and has an overall 2-second cast time from placing to the Eradicator fully implanting itself on the field. Then once it is on the field, the barrier and the Eradicator body have 500 HP each, and will fire 3 projectiles in a cone every 2 seconds towards the current slicer turret target if it is available, or Void's primary fire if not. And if no target is being hit by either of these methods, the Eradicator will not shoot its projectiles at all. These projectiles also deal the same sort of damage as when you reload to throw your slicer at an enemy, dealing from 55 to 90 maximum damage on a direct hit. The cooldown for Eradicate is 12 seconds and starts on the placement of the Eradicator, but it will restart if the Eradicator dies. So it can be particularly important to use your Propagate lifelink ability to keep your Eradicator alive, while also then using Assimilate to help keep its health up, even if that just ends up being a bit of a health sink rather than the barrier providing protection in itself. And as I mentioned with the alternate fire Assimilate, it can target Void's constructs. This also includes the Eradicator. As with Propagate, you can both propagate and assimilate the Eradicator, but when you assimilate the Eradicator, it will pull it to Void's current position. So you can move the Eradicator once it's been placed, but you have to sacrifice one of your other abilities to do so. But as when grabbing the slicer, when you use Assimilate in this way, its cooldown is halved from 8 to 4 seconds. And so finally onto Void's ultimate ability, Decimation, which doesn't exactly synergize with the rest of the kit immediately upon looking at it, but it allows them to sort of cover for some of their weaknesses and can synergize particularly well with Propagate, the lifelink ability. So, upon activating Decimation, Void's tentacle hair lifts him off the ground and gives him highly controllable 360-degree movement and a movement speed increase. Enemies that he tramples on with this hair are knocked aside and drained of their health. This is a transformation ultimate lasting 6 seconds, and during this time, Void can still use any of his abilities that do not rely upon his tentacles. The way I've set this up at present is that there will be 6 tentacles at max, each one stepping twice per second, and therefore being able to deal damage twice per second, dealing 60 damage per hit, with the radius that the legs are spread at scaling inversely with Void's height. At ground level, attacking at an 8 meter radius, and when closing on the skybox, shrinking down to a 4 meter radius. So you can think of this as sort of a mixture between Death Blossom and Barrage, where your positioning is going to be really important in order to get the most value out of this, while giving you a burst of mobility and sustainability simultaneously. And to point out finally how this links back to the Propagate ability, as Assimilate will absorb health from enemies and heal both Void and their propagated ally, Decimation works in the same way, that if you already have a lifelink propagation set up, any health drained by Decimation will also be absorbed to the ally that's lifelink to Void as well as Void themselves. Whew, so, that was my little trip into the Null sector, to find their leader, Void. I really hope you've enjoyed my concept, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one, for it is said that there are no good people, but I would ultimately like to believe otherwise. Thanks for staying with me to this point, teammates. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Please do all the YouTube things, etc. It's like a massive help to tiny-ass channels like myself. Take care of yourselves on the battlefield, and may the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Bye-bye.